A Roman father had already set money aside for his daughter's wedding, for the clothes, for the pearls, for the jewels, and then his daughter died before the wedding happened. She was 12 years, 11 months, and 7 days old. Pliny the Younger says the wedding money became funeral money, which is such a small administrative detail that it somehow makes the whole thing worse. Because in that world, a girl could still feel like a child to us and still have marriage waiting for her like an appointment. Now, the usual internet answer is that ancient people did this because everyone died at 30. That's tidy, and frankly, it's wrong in the way tidy answers often are. Ancient marriage usually wasn't two people reaching a romantic milestone. It was two families managing risk. Fertility, inheritance, labor, alliances, status, survival, all the tender little ingredients of a legal arrangement that somehow got flowers attached to it. And when people say ancient humans married young, what they often mean, whether they realize it or not, is that girls were married young to men who were considerably older. That distinction matters rather a lot. In many ancient societies, puberty worked almost like a switch. A daughter could move from child to virgin to wife to mother, not because her personality had finished loading, but because the family system had decided she now belonged in a different box. Rome put that logic into law. A girl could legally marry at 12, while a boy could legally marry at 14, although the legal minimum wasn't the same as ordinary life. Many Roman women seem to have married in their late teens, while Roman men often married in their mid to late 20s. But the law still tells you what the culture was willing to imagine. At 12, a girl's body could be treated as marriageable, even if, medically and emotionally, that should make everyone in the room uncomfortable. The older version of this system shows up in Babylonia. The Code of Hammurabi, compiled around 1750 BCE, treated marriage as something that had to be properly contracted. If a man took a woman without the paperwork, the law could say she wasn't legally his wife. Not exactly a candlelit proposal at the ziggurat. The point was bride wealth, dowry, inheritance, and legitimacy, which is to say, the romance department was not chairing the meeting. Martha Roth's work on Neo-Babylonian and Neo-Assyrian households suggests women often married around 14 to 20, while men were more often around 26 to 32. That's the structure in miniature. Young female fertility paired with older male resources. Classical Athens had its own version, with more civic self-importance, because of course it did. After Pericles' citizenship law in the 5th century BCE, legitimate Athenian birth became extremely serious business. Citizen children needed citizen parents, so marriage became part household arrangement, part citizenship machine. Athenian girls often married in their mid-teens, while men often waited until roughly 30. Xenophon gives us one of the colder little windows into this. In the Economicus, Ischomachus says his wife was not yet 15 when he married her, and that she'd been raised to see, hear, and ask as little as possible. For us, that sounds chilling. For Xenophon's elite male audience, it was supposed to sound orderly. This wasn't, we grew up together and fell in love. It was, I received a teenager and trained her to manage my house, which is a grimly efficient sentence. Sparta complicates the picture, as Sparta usually does by being aggressively itself. Spartan women seem to have married later than many Greek women, often around 18. Girls exercised, ate better than many of their Greek counterparts, and were expected to produce strong children for the state. So no, the ancient world didn't have one universal marriage setting. Marriage age depended on politics, property, gender ideology, and whatever local men had convinced themselves was natural. Rome also had rituals that made the transition painfully visible. A Roman girl might dedicate her childhood doll to a goddess before marriage, which is one of those facts that doesn't need much decoration. The toy leaves the girl's hands, and the wedding veil arrives. Childhood doesn't fade out, it gets handed over. And ancient people weren't simply oblivious to the danger of very young pregnancy. Cyrannus of Ephesus, a major physician in the 2nd century CE, warned that pregnancy was dangerous when the body was too immature. Roman law could allow marriage at 12, while medical caution pointed somewhere else. The shocking part isn't that nobody knew, it's that social pressure could outrank medical worry. Modern medicine is blunt about this too. The World Health Organization reports that mothers aged 10 to 19 face higher risks from complications like eclampsia and infection, and their babies face higher risks of preterm birth and low birth weight. The biology was never magically harmless. The culture just had other priorities. There's another myth hiding underneath all this. Girls matured earlier back then. The evidence generally points the other way. A study of Roman Britain suggests menarche often came around 15 to 17, which is later, not earlier, than many modern European girls. So a Roman girl married at 12 or 13 might not even have begun menstruating. And a girl married at 14 or 15 might be biologically capable of pregnancy, but still physically immature. The ancient logic wasn't, she's fully grown. It was, she's now usable inside the marriage system. Death absolutely shaped these decisions, just not in the cartoonish way people repeat online. Life expectancy at birth could be brutally low, sometimes in the 20s or low 30s. But that number was dragged downward by babies and children dying in enormous numbers. If someone survived early childhood, they might still expect to live for decades, often into their 40s or beyond. So ancient families weren't necessarily thinking, everyone dies at 30, hurry up. They were thinking, children die, mothers die, disease comes, wars happen, and we need heirs early enough that some of them survive. Ancient populations often needed very high fertility just to avoid shrinking. Some demographic models suggest roughly 5 or 6 live births per woman surviving to menopause. That's not romance. That's arithmetic with a pulse. Marriage also controlled legitimate heirs. Legitimate children inherited property, status, citizenship, and religious obligations to the family line. Before DNA tests, patriarchy ran on surveillance. If inheritance passes through men, then families become intensely anxious about knowing whose children are whose. That helps explain the obsession with virginity, seclusion, and early marriage. The younger and more sheltered the bride, the easier the system imagined she'd be to control. Again, grim, but coherent in the worst possible sense. Boys didn't simply become husbands the moment puberty arrived. A man often needed land, or a trade, or military standing, or enough authority to head a household. So men waited. That's why the phrase, ancient humans married young, can mislead. A more accurate sentence is that ancient societies often married girls young to older men who'd finally become economically useful. Not elegant, much more accurate. And the couple often wasn't choosing this by themselves. Cross-cultural work on hunter-gatherer societies found arranged marriage by parents or close kin as the primary mode in 85% of 190 societies. Marriage exchange, like bride price or bride service, appeared in about 80%. That doesn't mean Paleolithic girls were all being married at 12. It means marriage has been tangled in kinship and exchange for a very long time. Dating apps ask, what do you want? Ancient marriage systems asked, what does your family need? Marriage was also alliance technology. It could end a feud, secure trade, move labor, preserve land, or absorb a rival family without having to stab quite so many people. Elite families sometimes married daughters even earlier because the stakes were higher. Julia the Elder, Augustus's only biological child, was married at 14 to Marcus Claudius Marcellus. This wasn't a love story, it was dynasty management. Augustus had no son, so Julia's reproductive life became a political institution. She was widowed at 16, then married to Agrippa, then later married to Tiberius. For elite Roman girls, marriage could be foreign policy, inheritance law, and succession planning, wearing a wedding veil. Roman Egypt gives us something unusually precious, paperwork with numbers. Census returns from the 1st to 3rd centuries CE suggest women married early and very often. One reconstruction puts the median female marriage age around 17 and a half, with men in the early 20s and an average age gap of about 7.5 years. Roman Egypt also had full brother-sister marriage in roughly 1/6 of known unions, which isn't the main subject here, but does remind us that ancient marriage categories don't always map neatly onto modern instincts. Outside the elite, the calculation could be less imperial and more painfully ordinary. A daughter's marriage might reduce the number of mouths in her birth household, or bring in bride wealth, or use a dowry to secure her position in another family. A good match could be a form of protection in a world with no welfare state. But a daughter's labor at home could also be valuable, so not every family rushed to the legal minimum. Legal at 12 didn't mean everyone married at 12. In fact, early marriage could be especially tempting for elites because property and power were on the table. Ordinary people sometimes had to wait for tools, food, work, and space. Later, Northwestern Europe developed a very different pattern. Women often married in their 20s, men a little older, and plenty of people never married at all. So marriage age isn't automatic. It's cultural, legal, economic, and sometimes just brutally practical. Ancient people didn't marry young because they were biologically different. They married young, especially girls, because adulthood was defined through reproduction, family duty, and property transfer. Modern people ask, why would anyone let a teenager marry? Ancient families might have asked, how does a family survive if daughters aren't placed, sons aren't established, and heirs aren't secured? The uncomfortable part is that the system could be rational and still place the heaviest burden on girls. Every video like this takes hours of research before the script even starts, digging through law codes, medical texts, demographic studies, and honestly, way too many Roman funerary inscriptions. So if you learned something, please like the video, share it with someone who enjoys weird history, and subscribe to the channel. Comment below if there's an ancient life question you want covered next. Because if marriage age changes when economics change, then some part of what we call normal love may just be the economy speaking very softly.